Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I hope the gentle sounds of Minecraft mining and building are finding you well today as we dive into another collection of wild Reddit stories. There's something oddly satisfying about watching someone try to steal an entire house and end up with absolutely nothing instead. The audacity is breathtaking, and let's be honest, sometimes the best part is watching karma show up right on schedule. They want to control and ended up losing everything. It's like they handed over the rope and tied the knot themselves, completely oblivious to the consequences barreling toward them. Before we dive in, thank you to everyone who has been watching and commenting beneath the video to give me their feedback. I'm grateful to everyone who has taken their time and letting me know that they enjoy this type of content. It feels like we are growing into a small community. I'm going to keep trying my best to help you guys relax and unwind while we dive into the craziest Reddit drama of the internet. Today's stories feature family betrayals that cut deeper than diamond pickaxes, inheritance schemes that backfire spectacularly, and revenge so perfectly executed you'll be smiling as you drift off. Speaking of family betrayal, our first story introduces us to twins who were close until Grandma's declining health revealed one brother's true colors. Growing up, my twin brother Jake and I were inseparable. We shared everything from toys to secrets, and I truly believed we'd always have each other's backs. We weren't just siblings, we were best friends. That's how it had always been, until our grandmother's health began to decline rapidly last year. Grandma Louise had raised us after our parents died in a car accident when we were just 8. Her beautiful Victorian house had been our safe haven, with its creaky wooden floors, stained glass windows, and sprawling garden where we'd play for hours. The house had been in our family for generations and was worth nearly $1 million now, especially with property values skyrocketing in our area. When Grandma's dementia started getting worse, Jake and I agreed to take turns caring for her. I'd take mornings before my shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, and Jake would take evenings after his accounting job. The arrangement seemed perfect at first. We were both committed to giving back to the woman who had sacrificed so much for us. You know, Grandma always said this house would be split between us when she passes, Jake mentioned casually one evening as I was leaving. It'll be nice to keep it in the family. Definitely, I agreed, never imagining there was any ulterior motive behind his comment. We could never sell this place. Too many memories. As the months passed, I started noticing subtle changes in our routine. Jake began insisting on being the one to administer Grandma's medication. He claimed it was because he was more organized with the complicated schedule of pills. I didn't think much of it at the time, grateful for any help I could get while juggling my demanding nursing shifts. Then Jake started spending more time alone with Grandma. He'd shoo me away when I'd come in during his scheduled time with her, claiming they were having important conversations or that too many people confused her. Given her condition, that seemed reasonable, so again I didn't question it, but I should have. One Tuesday morning I arrived to find an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Inside, I discovered Jake sitting with a man in a suit at the kitchen table, papers spread out between them. Grandma was in her rocking chair, looking disoriented. "Oh, you're early," Jake said, looking annoyed. "This is Mr. Wilkins, Grandma's lawyer. We're just finishing up some paperwork." The lawyer nodded politely and quickly gathered his things. "Everything's in order now. I'll file these changes immediately, Mrs. Miller," he said to Grandma, who just smiled vaguely. After he left, I asked Jake what that was all about. His response chilled me. "Grandma decided to make some changes to her will," he said casually, not meeting my eyes. "She thinks it makes more sense for the house to go to just one person instead of being split. Fewer complications that way." "And let me guess," I said, my stomach sinking. "She chose you?" Jake finally looked at me with a smug smile that I'd never seen on my twin's face before. "Well, I am the one spending the most time with her. You're always too busy with work to really be here for her." I was speechless. I worked as a nurse to pay for Grandma's medical expenses. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. How could my own twin do this to me? Grandma wouldn't do that, I finally managed. She's always said everything would be split equally. People change their minds, Jake shrugged. Maybe if you spent less time at the hospital and more time here, things would be different. The words hurt more than he could know. I was pulling extra shifts specifically to afford Grandma's expensive medications that weren't covered by insurance. Meanwhile, Jake had been planning this betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. Grandma had been adamant about treating us equally her entire life. Even in her confused state, such a drastic change seemed out of character. And Jake's sudden interest in administering her medication. It's amazing how you can know someone your entire life and still miss the signs when they change right in front of you. Acting on a hunch, I hired a private investigator the next day. Mark was an old friend from high school who now ran his own PI business. I explained the situation, feeling slightly guilty for investigating my own brother, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. I need to know if Jake is taking advantage of Grandma's condition, I told Mark. It just doesn't make sense that she would suddenly change her will like this. Mark nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. I'll be discreet. Give me a week. That week was torture. I continued my normal routine, pretending nothing was wrong, while Jake became increasingly condescending, making comments about his house and how he might let me rent a room after Grandma was gone. Wait until you hear what the PI discovered. It was worse than I could have imagined. 7 days later, Mark called me to meet at a coffee shop across town. He looked grim as he slid a folder across the table. Your brother has been systematically manipulating your grandmother's medication, he said quietly. He's been deliberately overdosing her with her confusion medication before important conversations, then underdosing her clarity medications. The timeline matches perfectly with when he scheduled meetings with the lawyer. The evidence was damning. Mark had photographs of Jake tampering with pill organizers, adjusting dosages, and even discarding some pills entirely. But the most disturbing evidence came from a hidden microphone Mark had placed in Jake's car. In a recorded conversation with his girlfriend, Jake laughed about how easy it had been to convince Grandma to change her will. She doesn't even remember what day it is half the time, Jake's voice crackled through the recording. I just had to tell her that I was the only one taking care of her, and that my sibling abandoned her. She signed everything over to me in tears, talking about how grateful she was that at least one of her grandchildren cared. My hands shook as I listened. The calculated cruelty was unfathomable. There's more, Mark said, pointing to another report. I looked into this lawyer, Wilkins. He's not your grandmother's regular attorney. Jake hired him specifically for this change, and there are some irregularities in how the paperwork was filed. That was all I needed to hear. I took the evidence straight to my grandmother's real attorney, Miss Peterson, who had handled her affairs for decades. This is elder abuse, plain and simple, Miss Peterson said after reviewing everything. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult with diminished capacity. We'll contest this immediately and inform the proper authorities. Then came the confrontation I'd been dreading. With Ms. Peterson and an elder care advocate present, we gathered in Grandma's living room. Jake walked in, freezing when he saw the group waiting for him. What's this about? He asked, his confident facade cracking slightly. We know what you've been doing, Jake, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Manipulating Grandma's medication, lying to her about me abandoning her, bringing in a new lawyer to change her will when she wasn't in her right mind. His face went from confusion to anger in seconds. You can't prove anything, he snapped. Ms. Peterson played the recording. Jake's own voice filled the room, bragging about his manipulation. The color drained from his face. The will changes have already been contested, Miss Peterson informed him, and the medical examiner has confirmed that your grandmother's medication has been tampered with. That's elder abuse, Mr. Miller, a criminal offense. Then Grandma spoke, her voice clearer than it had been in months. She'd been properly medicated for the past 48 hours under medical supervision. How could you, Jake? She asked, tears in her eyes. After everything we've been through as a family? Jake had no answer. He stormed out, but that wasn't the end of it. The consequences came swiftly. The will was invalidated by the court within weeks. Jake's employer fired him when the elder abuse charges became public. Apparently, financial institutions don't look kindly on accountants who manipulate vulnerable people for financial gain. Our extended family, horrified by what he'd done, cut him off completely. Meanwhile, Grandma updated her will again, this time with proper medical documentation confirming her capacity. She left everything to me, a decision I never wanted to come about this way. I always wanted to be fair to both of you, she told me sadly, but he made his choice. The last I heard, Jake was living in a studio apartment across state lines, unable to find work in his field due to the pending charges. He tried calling once, not to apologize, but to accuse me of ruining his life. I blocked his number. Grandma is doing better now with proper medication management and round-the-clock professional care that I can afford thanks to family support. The house remains in our family, filled with memories both good and bad. Sometimes I walk through the rooms and still feel the echo of the bond I thought Jake and I shared. The twin who was once my other half is now a stranger, and the betrayal still stings. But there's a bitter justice in knowing that in his greed to take everything, he lost everything instead. But if you think that betrayal was cold, wait until you hear about the parents who secretly drained their child's entire future behind their back. I still remember the exact moment when I realized everything I'd worked for was gone. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon when my acceptance letter from Cornell arrived, my dream school since I was 12. I'd been checking the mailbox obsessively for weeks, and when that thick envelope finally showed up, I literally screamed in our driveway. My parents seemed happy for me. Mum hugged me tightly, and Dad clapped me on the shoulder with that proud smile I'd been working so hard to earn. All that hard work paid off, kiddo, he said. Let's celebrate tonight. Looking back, I should have noticed something off in their enthusiasm. There was a slight hesitation, a flicker of something, worry, guilt, in their expressions, but I was too excited to pay attention to those subtle clues. For 4 years of high school, I'd been working myself to exhaustion. Weekdays after school at the local coffee shop, weekends at the hardware store, all while maintaining a 4.0 GPA and participating in enough extracurriculars to make my application stand out. My parents had promised they'd been saving for my education since I was born, but they made it clear that college was expensive and I needed to contribute. We're putting away money every month, Mom would remind me, but tuition keeps rising, so every dollar you add will help. I didn't mind. I was proud of my work ethic, depositing almost every paycheck into the special college savings account they'd set up. By my calculations, between their contributions and mine, we had around $87,000 saved up. Not enough for all 4 years at Cornell, but enough to make it possible with some financial aid and continued part-time work. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later when I needed to send in my tuition deposit to secure my spot. Mom kept saying she'd take care of it, but as the deadline approached, I got anxious. Mom, we need to send that deposit check today, I reminded her over breakfast. The deadline's tomorrow. Right, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Your father will handle it tonight. But that night, Dad wasn't home for dinner. He texted saying he was working late, something that had been happening more frequently in recent months. I decided to just write the check myself. Mom, I'll just send the deposit from the college account. Can I get the checkbook? She froze, and that's when I knew something was very wrong. I'll take care of it tomorrow, honey, she said too quickly. First thing. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. After she went to bed, I found the most recent statement for the college fund. It had always been in my name, but with my parents as the custodian since I was a minor. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Instead of the $87,000 that should have been there, the balance showed $50. $50. I thought there must be some mistake. Maybe they'd moved the money to another account for a better interest rate. I logged into the online banking portal, something I rarely did since my parents managed the account. The transaction history told the horrifying truth. Over the past 6 months, there had been a series of large withdrawals, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. The most recent withdrawal had been 3 weeks ago, emptying all but $50 from the account. I couldn't breathe. This had to be fraud, right? Someone had stolen our information. I called the bank's 24-hour helpline, and the representative confirmed my worst fears. All withdrawals had been authorized with proper ID and signatures. My parents had been systematically emptying my college fund. I barely slept that night. When I confronted them the next morning, showing them the statement, they couldn't even look me in the eyes. "We were going to tell you," Mum said weakly. "Tell me what? That all my hard work was for nothing? That you've been lying to me for years?" My voice was rising, but I couldn't control it. Dad finally spoke up. "It's just temporary. We made some investments that will pay off soon." "What investments?" I demanded. More silence, more averted gazes. "What investments?" I shouted, something I'd never done to my parents before. Dad mumbled something about market opportunities and temporary cash flow issues, but it was all vague corporate speak that made no sense. While they were at work that day, I did something I'm not proud of, but I was desperate for answers. I searched through their home office and found credit card statements they'd hidden in a locked drawer, a lock that was no match for a YouTube tutorial on lockpicking. What I found made me physically sick. First-class flights to Paris, a Mediterranean cruise, designer shopping sprees in Milan, 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants. The dates matched perfectly with the withdrawals from my college fund. They hadn't invested my money. They had spent it, all of it, on themselves. And here's where it gets really twisted. They had created a separate Instagram account I knew nothing about, documenting their luxury second honeymoon. Adventures for a small group of friends while telling me they were going on business trips or visiting sick relatives. There were photos of them toasting champagne on balconies overlooking the Eiffel Tower, captioned "Living Our Best Life." That's when everything unraveled. I printed out every damning piece of evidence. The bank statements, the credit card bills, screenshots of their secret vacation photos, and laid them out on the dining room table. When they came home, I was waiting. "So this is what happened to my college fund?" I asked, pointing to the evidence. "Your investments were actually luxury vacations you've been hiding from everyone?" The look on their faces, the mixture of shock at being caught and embarrassment at their actions, would have been almost comical if it wasn't so devastating. "We work hard," Dad finally said defensively. "We deserved a break that cost $87,000. My $87,000. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I worked 2 jobs for 4 years for this money." "We'll figure something out," Mum tried to reassure me. "Maybe you can take a gap year or start at community college." They genuinely thought this was a minor inconvenience they'd created, not the complete betrayal of trust it actually was. The casual way they discussed alternatives made it clear they had never intended to replace what they'd taken. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed a bag and called my Aunt Sarah, Mum's sister who lived across town. Without explaining everything over the phone, I asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She agreed immediately. When I showed her the evidence, Aunt Sarah was horrified. "This isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable," she said, examining the account statements. "That account was in your name, even if they were custodians." With Aunt Sarah's encouragement, I expanded the circle of people who knew what had happened. I called my grandparents, Dad's parents, who had always emphasized the importance of education and family responsibility. Grandpa Howard, usually a calm and measured man, was furious when he learned the truth. He drove 3 hours to meet with me and Aunt Sarah the very next day. "This stops now," he said firmly. "Your parents have broken a sacred trust, and there will be consequences. Those consequences came swiftly. Grandpa not only agreed to cover my tuition for Cornell, but also contacted his attorney to create a trust fund for me that my parents couldn't access. He then informed the entire extended family about what had happened. The family fallout was nuclear. My parents suddenly found themselves unwelcome at family gatherings. Relatives who had respected them for raising such a responsible, hard-working daughter now saw them for what they were, selfish people who had stolen from their own child. Meanwhile, the credit card bills for their extravagant lifestyle started coming due. Without my college fund to pay them off, my parents quickly found themselves in serious debt. Dad's company also faced downsizing around the same time, adding financial pressure they weren't prepared for. 3 months later, as I was preparing to leave for Cornell, they made a desperate attempt at reconciliation. "We know we made a terrible mistake," Mom said, tears in her eyes. "We got caught up in trying to recapture our youth, but we never meant to hurt you." "We're selling the house to pay off the debts," Dad added. "We'll be downsizing to an apartment. Once we're back on our feet, we promise we'll pay you back every cent." But some betrayals can't be undone with promises. Trust, once shattered, doesn't easily reform, especially when the people who were supposed to protect you chose their temporary pleasure over your future. I'm now in my second semester at Cornell, thriving academically and working a reasonable part-time job that doesn't burn me out. Grandpa's trust covers my tuition and housing, and I'm studying finance, partly inspired by my desire to understand money management and never be financially vulnerable again. My parents are still struggling, both financially and socially. The family is largely rallied around me while keeping them at arm's length. They send me texts occasionally, usually around holidays or my birthday, but I keep my responses brief and factual. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to truly forgive them, not for their sake, but for my own peace of mind. But then I remember those Instagram captions, "living our best life," written while they were actively destroying mine, and I realized that some wounds take a very, very long time to heal. Just when I thought I'd seen the worst wedding drama possible, I discovered a sister who took betrayal to a whole new level. Mid-roll CTA. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one and love connecting with fellow drama enthusiasts. Now, back to our regularly scheduled family betrayal. After 3 years of dating, Tyler had finally proposed, and I'd spent months planning what should have been the happiest day of my life. I wanted everything to be perfect: the venue, the flowers, the music, and especially my dress. I'd fallen in love with a vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace detailing that made me feel like a princess the moment I tried it on. My sister Jen had been with me when I found it, and she teared up saying I looked beautiful. Jen had always been the pretty one, the social butterfly who turned heads wherever she went. I was the quiet sister, the responsible one who'd put herself through nursing school, while Jen bounced between jobs and relationships. But none of that mattered anymore. I'd found a wonderful man who loved me for exactly who I was, and Jen seemed genuinely happy for me. She'd enthusiastically accepted when I asked her to be my maid of honor. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that seemed to whisper promises of good fortune. My bridesmaids and I had stayed at the venue's bridal suite the night before, and we were all buzzing with excitement as we sipped mimosas and got ready for hair and makeup appointments. "I'm going to check on your dress," Jen volunteered, flashing me her signature dazzling smile. "Make sure everything's perfect for my baby sister." I thanked her, focused on the makeup artist who was carefully applying my foundation. Jen had been a tremendous help throughout the wedding planning, taking on tasks without being asked and checking items off my to-do list when I became overwhelmed with work and wedding stress. I felt lucky to have her support. 20 minutes later, Jen burst back into the suite, her face pale with shock. "Kate, there's been an accident," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to come see." My stomach dropped as I followed her to the dressing room. There, hanging on the rack, was my beautiful wedding dress, now covered in large, ugly red wine stains that spread across the bodice and down the skirt like bloody handprints. "No, no, no," I whispered, reaching out to touch the ruined fabric. "This can't be happening." One of the venue staff must have knocked over a glass while cleaning, Jen explained quickly. "I already spoke to the manager, but they're denying responsibility. I'm so sorry." Kate. I felt like I might collapse. My perfect dress, the one I'd spent months paying off, was destroyed just hours before my ceremony. Tears welled in my eyes as panic set in. What am I going to do? The ceremony starts in 4 hours. Jen put her arm around me, squeezing my shoulder. "I have a solution," she said. "Remember that white Vera Wang dress I bought for that charity gala last month? It's in my car. I never wore it. The tags are still on. It's not a wedding dress, but it's elegant and white, and I think it would fit you perfectly." Through my tears, I nodded gratefully. What other choice did I have? "Thank you," I managed. "I don't know what I'd do without you." While Jen went to retrieve her dress, I sat in front of the mirror, trying to pull myself together. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Can't wait to see you. Everything okay at your end?" I didn't want to worry him, so I replied with a quick, "All good, see you soon," before setting my phone down. Just then, it buzzed again. This time it was Marcus, Tyler's cousin who worked security at the venue. "Kate, I think you should see this. Check your email." Confused, I opened my email to find a video attachment from the venue's security camera. My hands shook as I pressed play. The footage showed the dressing room from earlier that morning. There was my dress hanging beautifully on the rack, and there was Jen looking around furtively before pulling a bottle of red wine from her purse. With deliberate movements, she uncorked it and poured it all over my wedding dress, making sure to spread the stain as much as possible. Then she carefully placed the empty bottle in the trash can, covering it with paper towels before walking out. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My own sister had sabotaged my wedding dress. But why? Jen had seemed so supportive, so excited for me. None of this made sense. As I sat there processing this betrayal, another memory surfaced. Jen had been acting strangely the past few months, constantly texting, making excuses to leave family gatherings early, being unusually interested in Tyler's family. At our rehearsal dinner, she'd spent a long time chatting with Tyler's brother James, who'd come without his wife, claiming she was home with their sick child. That's when everything unraveled. I heard the shower running in the adjoining bathroom. Jen was freshening up after retrieving her dress. Her phone lay on the vanity, carelessly unlocked. I never would have invaded her privacy under normal circumstances, but these were hardly normal circumstances. With shaking fingers, I picked up her phone and opened her messages. Right at the top was a conversation with Jay that contained months of explicit texts and photos. I scrolled up to see the contact details, and there it was, James, my fiancé's married brother. "Can't wait to see you in that maid of honor dress," read one of his recent texts, "though I'd rather see you out of it." "Just a few more hours of this wedding charade," Jen had replied. "Then we can sneak away during the reception." There were dozens of messages planning their affair, complaining about how boring the wedding would be, and even discussing how they could spend more time together after I was married and part of the family. In one particularly cruel exchange, Jen had written, "Wait till you see what I'm wearing. It'll be so much better than Kate's dress." To which James had replied, "You'd look better in a trash bag than she would in a designer gown." A cold rage replaced my shock. I quickly took photos of the incriminating messages using my own phone, then replaced Jen's exactly as I'd found it. By the time she emerged from the shower wrapped in a towel, I had composed myself enough to thank her again for the dress. It's what sisters do, she said with a smile that now looked calculating rather than caring. Besides, you'll look better in my dress anyway. Your original was a bit dated. I forced myself to smile back. I'm sure you're right. For the next few hours, I went through the motions of wedding preparations. I let the hairstylist finish my updo. I put on Jen's dress, which did fit perfectly, I had to admit, and I even posed for pre-ceremony photos with my bridesmaids. All the while, I was formulating a plan. When the wedding coordinator came to tell us it was time, I asked for a moment alone with my maid of honor. Once everyone else had left, I turned to Jen. I know what you did to my dress, I said quietly, and I know about you and James. Her face went from confusion to shock to defensive anger in seconds. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Save it, I replied, gathering my borrowed skirt and heading for the door. The truth always comes out, Jen. Always. The music started as I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. Tyler looked handsome and nervous at the altar, with James standing beside him as best man. I could see James's eyes flick nervously between me and Jen, who followed behind me with the other bridesmaids. When I reached the altar, the officiant asked everyone to be seated and began his welcome. I let him get through his introduction before I gently interrupted. Before we continue, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, there's something I need to share with everyone here today. Confused murmurs rippled through the guests as I took out my phone and connected it to the venue's AV system, something I'd arranged with the technician just minutes before the ceremony. This is footage from the venue's security camera this morning, I announced. The large screen that had been set up to display a photo montage during the reception now showed Jen deliberately destroying my wedding dress. Gasps and whispers filled the room. I could see Jen's face drain of color as her betrayal played out for everyone to see. But I wasn't done. And these, I continued, advancing to the photos I'd taken of her text messages, with the explicit content blurred but the names and general tone still visible, are conversations between my sister Jen and James, Tyler's brother and best man, who is married with 2 children. The room erupted in chaos. James's wife, who was sitting in the front row, stood up and slapped him hard across the face before storming out. Jen burst into tears and ran from the altar. My parents looked stunned, and Tyler's family was in various states of shock and anger. Tyler grabbed my hand, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. Kate, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I squeezed his hand back. It's not your fault. But I think we need to postpone this wedding. And that's exactly what we did. We sent our guests home with heartfelt apologies and promises to be in touch about future plans. James and his wife separated that day, with divorce proceedings starting shortly after. Jen left town the next morning, too embarrassed to face any of us, and moved in with a cousin in another state. The aftermath was painful but necessary. Tyler and I took some time to process everything, to make sure our relationship was still on solid ground after the chaos his brother and my sister had caused. We decided that what we had was worth fighting for. 6 months later, we had a much smaller ceremony in my parents' backyard. My original dress had been professionally restored. The wine stains were completely gone, almost as if the whole incident had never happened. My college roommate stood beside me as my new maid of honor, and Tyler's closest friend replaced James as best man. When we finally said our vows, they meant even more than they would have the first time around. We had weathered a storm together and come out stronger on the other side. As for Jen, we're slowly rebuilding our relationship through carefully supervised phone calls. She's in therapy now, working on her issues with jealousy and self-worth. James moved to another state after the divorce was finalized and rarely contacts his family. Sometimes I think about how different things would have been if Marcus hadn't sent me that security footage, or if I hadn't checked Jen's phone. I would have married Tyler unaware of the betrayal happening right under my nose, with a sister who resented me and a brother-in-law who disrespected me. Instead, I got the truth, painful as it was, and the chance to start my marriage with honesty instead of hidden deception. They say that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. That day, I learned to pay attention not just to what people say, but what they actually do when they think no one is watching. As I scrolled through more Reddit stories, I never imagined someone's roommate situation could turn into such an explosive case of karmic justice. When my grandmother passed away last year, I was devastated. She practically raised me after my parents' divorce, and losing her felt like losing my anchor in life. Amid the grief, there was an unexpected silver lining. Grandma had left me $45,000 in her will, money she'd been quietly saving her entire life, specifically for my education. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you, she always said. I'd been working as a barista after completing my bachelor's degree, trying to save enough for graduate school to pursue my dream of becoming a clinical psychologist. Grandma's gift meant I could finally apply to programs without taking on crippling debt. It was bittersweet. I'd trade that money in a heartbeat to have her back, but I was determined to use it exactly as she'd intended. The inheritance arrived as a cashier's check, which I deposited into my regular bank account while researching the best education savings account options. My financial advisor recommended a specific account with tax advantages for grad students, but setting it up required some paperwork and processing time. In the meantime, I withdrew the money in cash, not the smartest move in retrospect, but I was worried about keeping such a large sum in my regular checking account that was linked to various apps and services. I stored the cash in a fireproof safe in my apartment, hidden in my closet. Only my roommate Derek knew about it, and I trusted him completely. We'd been living together for 3 years after meeting in our senior year of college. He was a computer programmer who worked from home most days, while I worked shifts at the coffee shop. We'd never had any issues before. He paid his rent on time, respected my space, and we'd even gone on a few road trips together. I considered him a friend, not just a roommate. About 2 weeks after I received the inheritance, Derek started showing up with expensive new purchases. First, it was a top-of-the-line gaming laptop, then a 75-inch OLED TV for the living room. The following weekend, he pulled into our apartment complex driving a used BMW. "Whoa, where'd that come from?" I asked as he proudly showed off the car. "Got a bonus at work," he said with a grin. The project I've been killing myself over for months finally got approved. The client was so happy they gave the whole team bonuses. I congratulated him and didn't think much of it. Derek worked for a tech startup, and while he didn't usually talk much about his projects, I knew tech companies sometimes gave generous bonuses. We celebrated with takeout that night, which he insisted on paying for. A few days later, I decided to deposit the first installment of tuition money into my newly established education account. But when I opened my safe, my heart stopped. The money was gone, all of it. I tore apart my closet thinking I might have moved it, then searched my entire room. Nothing. I immediately called Derek, who was out running errands in his new car. "The money from my safe is missing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you move it or see anything suspicious?" "What? No, of course not," he responded, sounding genuinely concerned. "Are you sure you put it in there? Maybe you stored it somewhere else and forgot?" "I'm positive, Derek. It was $45,000 in cash. That's not something I would misplace." "Well, there's been no break-in. Maybe you should check again. I'll be home soon to help you look." When Derek returned, he helped me search the apartment, but we both knew it was futile. Eventually, I called the police, who sent an officer to take a report. The officer was sympathetic, but not hopeful. "Unfortunately, with no signs of forced entry and no witnesses, this is going to be difficult to pursue criminally," he explained. "The fact that the safe wasn't broken into suggests it was either left unlocked or opened by someone who knew the combination. Do you share that information with anyone?" I hadn't explicitly told Derek the combination, but he had been in the room a few times when I'd opened it. It was possible he had seen me enter the code. This might be better handled as a civil matter, the officer continued. You can sue for the missing funds if you believe you know who took them. After the officer left, I sat on my bed feeling utterly defeated. I knew Derek had taken the money. The timing of his sudden spending spree was too coincidental, but I had no proof. And without proof, I couldn't go to small claims court, let alone see any criminal charges filed. That's when everything unraveled. I decided to set a trap. I purchased a small hidden camera online and installed it in the living room, angled toward the couch where we usually had our conversations. Then I waited for the right moment to confront Derek again, making sure we'd be in the camera's field of view. That Saturday, Derek was lounging on the couch playing a new video game on his expensive laptop. I sat down across from him, steeling myself for the conversation. Derek, I need to talk to you about the missing money, I began. I've been thinking about it, and the timing of your new purchases, it just seems too coincidental. He paused his game and looked at me with a mixture of shock and indignation. Are you seriously accusing me of stealing from you? After 3 years of living together? That's messed up. I'm just trying to understand what happened. $45,000 doesn't just vanish, and suddenly you have a new car, a new laptop, a new TV. I told you I got a bonus at work, he snapped. Call my boss if you don't believe me. This is insulting. I pressed further, watching his reactions carefully. The police think it had to be someone who knew about the safe and possibly the combination. That narrows it down pretty much just to you. That's when his demeanor changed. A smirk slowly spread across his face. You know what? Even if I did take your little emergency fund, which I'm not saying I did, you'd never be able to prove it, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The money's already gone through so many accounts and conversions, it would be impossible to trace. So maybe you should just drop it and be more careful next time. My blood ran cold at his confession, but I kept my expression neutral. So you admit you took it? He laughed. I admit nothing, but hypothetically, if someone were to take cash from an unlocked safe after watching their roommate enter the combination a dozen times, that would be on the roommate for being careless, wouldn't it? I ended the conversation there, telling him I needed to process this betrayal. Once in my room, I immediately downloaded the video from the hidden camera. There it was, clear as day, Derek essentially confessing to the theft, explaining how he'd memorized my safe combination and boasting about how untraceable he'd made the money. I took the video straight to the police station the next day. The officer who viewed it immediately called in a detective who seemed unusually interested in the case. We're going to need a formal statement from you, the detective said. This video is exactly what we needed. Within 48 hours, Derek was arrested at our apartment. I had made sure to be at work when it happened, not wanting to face him. When I returned home, police officers were still searching his room and computer. We found something you should know about, the detective told me privately. Your roommate wasn't just stealing from you. We've discovered evidence that he's been running a sophisticated credit card scam targeting elderly victims. We've been tracking this operation for months but couldn't identify the perpetrator until now. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had stolen inheritance money from me and had been scamming other people's grandparents as well. The detective explained that Derek had been using his programming skills to create phishing websites that looked like legitimate banking sites, specifically designed to trick older people who were less familiar with online security. Your video gave us probable cause for a search warrant, the detective continued. Once we had access to his devices, we found everything: lists of victims, credit card numbers, scripts for calling elderly targets. He's looking at federal charges now, not just theft. 3 weeks later, I received even better news. They had traced my inheritance money to several accounts Derek had opened. Because the investigation had frozen all his assets, I would be able to recover most of the $45,000 he had stolen from me. Derek eventually pled guilty to multiple federal charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse, in addition to the theft of my inheritance. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. The detective who handled my case called me after the sentencing. "Just wanted you to know," she said, "that your hidden camera video didn't just help you get your money back. It helped us shut down a scam that had stolen over $300,000 from elderly victims across the country. Your grandmother would be proud." I'm now in my second year of graduate school, funded partly by Grandma's recovered inheritance. Sometimes I think about Derek sitting in his prison cell, wondering if those material possessions were worth 7 years of his life. I hope he's reflecting on the irony that his greed didn't just cost him his freedom, it also helped put an end to his entire criminal operation. As my grandmother always said, education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you. She was right about that. But justice, it turns out, is another thing that can't be stolen, only delayed. If you think having a thieving roommate is bad, imagine discovering your mother-in-law has been secretly endangering your child's health for months. When my daughter Emma was diagnosed with severe dairy allergies at age 3, our entire world changed. After multiple ER visits from accidental exposures, endless consultations with specialists, and watching my baby suffer through painful reactions, my husband Michael and I made the decision to maintain a completely vegan household. It wasn't just about avoiding dairy, it was about creating a safe environment where Emma wouldn't accidentally grab the wrong snack and end up in anaphylactic shock. For 5 years, we'd managed Emma's condition successfully. She was now a happy, healthy 8-year-old who understood her dietary restrictions and had adapted well to our lifestyle. The only persistent problem was my mother-in-law, Sandra. From day one, Sandra treated Emma's allergies as if they were either completely made up or a massive overreaction on our part. "Children have been drinking milk for thousands of years," she'd say dismissively. "This allergy nonsense is just modern parenting gone too far." We tried everything to help her understand, showed her Emma's medical records, had the doctor explain the severity of the condition, even made her watch videos of children experiencing anaphylaxis so she could recognize the symptoms. Nothing worked. Sandra remained convinced that we were depriving Emma of a normal childhood with our extreme diet. "A little meat never hurt anyone," became her constant refrain whenever we declined her offers of non-vegan food. My son grew up eating everything, and he turned out just fine. For years, Michael played peacekeeper between us. "That's just how Mum is," he'd say. "She means well, she just doesn't understand." To keep the peace, we limited our visits to Sandra's house and always brought Emma's food with us when we did go. It wasn't ideal, but it seemed to work, until Emma started getting sick. It began about 3 months ago. Every time we visited Sandra, Emma would develop severe stomach cramps and diarrhea a few hours after we left. The first time, we assumed it was just a bug. The second time, we started to wonder. By the third consecutive visit with the same pattern, I was suspicious. "Do you think your mother could be feeding Emma something she shouldn't eat?" I asked Michael one night after another episode that left Emma crying in pain. "Mom wouldn't do that," he said firmly. "She knows how serious Emma's allergies are." I wasn't so sure. Sandra had recently become even more vocal about our dietary choices, especially after she learned that one of her church friends had cured her grandson's lactose intolerance by gradually exposing him to dairy. No matter how many times we explained that Emma's IgE-mediated allergies were completely different from lactose intolerance, Sandra insisted they were the same thing. We took Emma to her allergist, who ran tests but couldn't find anything unusual, besides confirming that yes, she'd definitely been exposed to allergens. The doctor asked if Emma could have accessed restricted foods at school, but her school was actually very accommodating and had strict protocols in place. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I purchased a small nanny cam disguised as a teddy bear keychain and attached it to Emma's backpack before our next Sunday lunch at Sandra's house. "Isn't Emma getting a little old for stuffed animals?" Sandra commented when she saw it. It was a gift from her friend, I lied. She loves it. The lunch went as usual. Sandra made pointed comments about how pale Emma looked and how she'd fill out more with some proper nutrition. I gritted my teeth and focused on making it through the afternoon without an argument. When Emma asked to play in the backyard, Sandra volunteered to watch her while Michael and I helped clean up from lunch. Later that evening, after putting Emma to bed, she was once again clutching her stomach and crying. I downloaded the footage from the nanny cam. What I saw made my blood boil. The video clearly showed Sandra in her kitchen, Emma sitting at the counter. I made something special for you, Sandra said, placing a bowl in front of my daughter. It's my famous beef stew. Your daddy used to love it when he was your age. I can't eat that, Grandma, Emma replied. It has meat and probably dairy. I'm allergic. Nonsense, Sandra said firmly. Those are just your mother's rules. A little meat and dairy won't hurt you. In fact, it'll make you stronger. Don't you want to be strong? But Mom and Dad said... Your mom and dad are confused, Sandra interrupted. This is good food that will help you grow. Just try a little bit. It'll be our secret. Emma hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I don't want to keep secrets from Mum and Dad. Sandra's voice turned stern. Don't you love your grandma? I made this especially for you. Just a few bites. If you don't want it, I'll be very sad. Reluctantly, Emma took a few bites of the stew. Sandra beamed with approval. Good girl. Now, for dessert, I have some special ice cream. Ice cream has dairy, Grandma. It makes me really sick, Emma protested. But her voice was weaker now. This is how children have eaten for generations, Sandra insisted, placing a bowl of ice cream in front of her. Your body just needs to get used to normal food. The footage continued, showing Emma eventually giving in and eating some of the ice cream under Sandra's persistent pressure. Before they left the kitchen, Sandra knelt down and took Emma's hands. Now, remember, this is our special treat. Don't tell Mommy or Daddy, okay? They wouldn't understand our special grandma time. Emma nodded reluctantly, and I had to stop the video because my hands were shaking too much with rage to continue. And here's where it gets truly absurd. When I showed Michael the footage, he was devastated but still wanted to give his mother a chance to explain herself. We confronted her the next day, showing her the video evidence of what she'd done. Instead of apologizing, Sandra laughed. You're overreacting as usual. I'm just trying to save my granddaughter from malnutrition. Children need meat and dairy to grow properly. You should be thanking me for caring enough to counteract your ridiculous diet restrictions. She was in pain for days, I shouted. She could have ended up in the hospital. Do you understand what anaphylaxis is? Sandra waved her hand dismissively. She was fine. A little stomach ache is normal when you introduce new foods. Her body just needs to adjust. Michael, finally finding his backbone, told his mother that we wouldn't be visiting again until she could respect our parenting decisions and Emma's health needs. Sandra dismissed his concerns and told him he was under my influence and would come to his senses eventually. As we were leaving, she called out, Don't forget my retirement party next weekend. 40 years at the bank deserves a celebration. That's when an idea formed in my mind. A perfectly terrible, absolutely justified idea. Sandra's retirement party was a lavish affair at the local country club. Over 200 guests from her church, workplace, and community had gathered to celebrate her 4 decades of service at the same bank. She'd spent months planning every detail, from the champagne toasts to the commemorative booklets highlighting her career achievements. Michael was hesitant about attending after what had happened, but Sandra had called him daily, insisting that family needs to be there, and that it would look strange if we didn't show up. Eventually he agreed we would make an appearance, if only to keep the peace. The evening began with cocktails and appetizers, followed by dinner and speeches from Sandra's colleagues praising her dedication and work ethic. Sandra herself was scheduled to give a speech afterward, thanking everyone for their support throughout her career. When Sandra took the podium, resplendent in an expensive new dress and beaming with pride, I slipped away to speak with the AV technician I had contacted earlier in the week. I handed him a USB drive containing an edited version of the nanny cam footage, with Emma's face blurred for privacy, but Sandra's clearly visible. "As we discussed," I whispered, right after she finishes her speech. As Sandra concluded her remarks to enthusiastic applause, the large screen behind her that had been showing a slideshow of her career highlights suddenly switched to the footage of her deliberately feeding my allergic daughter forbidden foods and instructing her to lie about it. The room fell silent as the video played. Sandra, unaware of what was happening behind her, looked confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. Then she turned and saw the footage, her face draining of color. I walked up to the podium as the video ended. "For those who don't know me, I'm Sandra's daughter-in-law," I said, my voice steady. "What you just witnessed is Sandra deliberately feeding my 8-year-old daughter foods she is severely allergic to, then forcing her to keep it secret. My daughter ended up in severe pain for days after these special treats. This wasn't the first time, but I promise you it will be the last." The shocked murmurs grew louder as I continued. Sandra has presented herself as a pillar of the community for decades, someone who cares about others, but this is how she treats her own granddaughter, with complete disregard for her health and safety, because she thinks she knows better than doctors and medical science. Sandra tried to grab the microphone from me, sputtering denials, but her boss, a man I'd specifically informed of the situation beforehand, gently led her away from the podium. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's celebration," I concluded. "I just believe that after 40 years of presenting a certain face to the world, the truth should be known before Sandra begins her retirement. Thank you for your time." I stepped down and walked back to my table where Michael sat, white-faced but resolute. Around us, Sandra's church friends and colleagues were whispering in horrified tones. Several people who knew Emma personally came over to express their shock and support. Sandra's carefully cultivated reputation as a caring Christian grandmother was shattered in an instant. She left the party early, escorted by a few loyal friends who shot daggers at me with their eyes, but most of her guests remained, many of them approaching us with stories of their own about Sandra's boundary violations and dismissive attitude toward others' health concerns over the years. That night, Michael made the difficult decision to cut contact with his mother. "I kept making excuses for her," he admitted as we drove home, "but seeing that video, hearing how she manipulated Emma, I can't allow that in our lives anymore." It's been 6 months since the retirement party incident. Sandra has made multiple attempts to contact us, ranging from tearful apologies to angry accusations that we humiliated her and ruined her retirement. We've maintained our distance, and Emma's mysterious stomach problems have completely disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if publicly exposing Sandra was too harsh, but then I remember Emma crying in pain, and I know I would do it again in a heartbeat. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some boundaries must be enforced with consequences when repeated conversations fail. The depths of workplace revenge became crystal clear when I read about an employee who turned corporate exploitation into the sweetest professional justice. I spent 3 years pouring my heart and soul into Nexus Technologies, a promising startup that developed custom software solutions for financial institutions. When I joined, there were only 8 employees working out of a cramped office with mismatched furniture. By my 3rd year, we'd grown to over 50 people with sleek new headquarters and several major clients. I had risen to lead software engineer, managing a team of 5 developers and single-handedly architecting our core product. The company's success was built largely on my code. I had designed our flagship financial processing system from the ground up, working countless late nights and weekends in those early days when we were all motivated by stock options and the excitement of building something new. Our CEO, Richard, often joked that my brain contained the company's most valuable assets. There was truth in that jest. I had built the system so quickly that comprehensive documentation always remained on the someday list. Every quarterly review, I would warn management about this technical debt. We need to allocate time for proper documentation and knowledge transfer, I'd explain. Right now, I'm the only one who fully understands how everything fits together. Each time they'd nod in agreement, but the resources never materialized. Next quarter, they'd promise. Once we land the Meridian contract, or after the Series B funding closes. There was always a reason to prioritize new features over infrastructure stability. Everything changed when Richard hired Marcus as our new director of engineering. Marcus came from a large corporation with slick presentations and a management style straight out of the 1980s. From day one, he made it clear he thought startups were run by undisciplined children and needed a real leader to professionalize operations. During his first week, Marcus called me into his office for what he termed a calibration meeting. "Your team's productivity metrics are unacceptable," he declared without even offering me a seat. "Industry standard is 15 story points per developer per week. Your team averages only 12. I tried explaining that story points were relative measures, not absolute metrics that could be compared across teams, let alone across companies. I also pointed out that we prioritized quality over quantity, with an exceptionally low bug rate compared to other teams. Marcus waved away my explanations. "I expect immediate improvement. I've promised the board a 30% increase in development output this quarter." "That's not realistic without sacrificing quality or burning out the team," I countered. His eyes narrowed. "I didn't ask for your opinion on what's realistic. I'm telling you what's expected." That conversation set the tone for our working relationship. Over the next month, Marcus instituted mandatory daily status reports, micromanaged technical decisions he didn't understand, and kept moving deadlines earlier without consulting the people actually doing the work. Then came the Friday afternoon bombshell. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus called an emergency team meeting and announced a new client implementation needed to be completed by Monday morning. "But that's at least a 2-week project," I protested, looking at the requirements. "I've already promised the client will deliver by Monday," Marcus replied coldly. "I expect your team here tomorrow and Sunday to make it happen. We don't work weekends unless it's a true emergency, and we're always compensated for overtime," I explained, staying calm. "That's been company policy since the beginning." "Policies change," Marcus snapped. "This is mandatory." After the meeting, I stayed behind to speak with him privately. "My team has families and prior commitments. We can't just drop everything for poor planning on the sales side, and legally you need to pay overtime for this kind of last-minute demand." Marcus's face reddened. "You seem confused about your position here. You don't make the decisions. I do. And I've decided your team works this weekend, unpaid, because that's what salaried professionals do." "That's actually not what labor laws in this state say," I replied. "Mandatory overtime requires compensation regardless of salary status, except for very specific exemptions that don't apply to most of my team." That's when he completely lost it. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of labor lawyer? If you don't like how I run things, there's the door." I took a deep breath. "I'm not coming in this weekend, and I'm not asking my team to either. We can start on the implementation Monday and work with the client on a reasonable timeline." "Clear out your desk," he said icily. "You're fired for insubordination and poor performance. I'll have HR prepare your final paycheck." I stood there momentarily stunned, even though I'd seen this coming. Poor performance? I've received nothing but excellent reviews for 3 years. "Not from me, you haven't," Marcus smirked. "I've documented multiple instances of your resistance to management directives. Security will escort you out." And just like that, 3 years of dedication ended with a security guard watching me pack my coffee mug and family photos into a cardboard box. I sent a quick message to my team explaining what had happened and advising them to document any unpaid overtime requests in writing. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't even angry, just disappointed and somewhat curious about what would happen when they realized what Marcus had done. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That Monday, I received panicked calls from 3 different developers. The client portal was down. Nobody could figure out why. Tuesday brought more problems. The automated reconciliation system was generating errors, and the database replication had mysteriously stopped working. By Wednesday, I'd received voicemails from Richard, the CEO, and 2 board members. By Thursday morning, Marcus himself called, his arrogant tone replaced with barely concealed desperation. "We need you to come back and fix these issues," he said, not quite managing to make it sound like anything but begging. "I'm prepared to overlook our previous disagreement." I almost laughed. "You mean you're prepared to pretend you didn't illegally fire me for refusing to violate labor laws? That's generous of you." "Look," he backpedaled, "we can discuss a raise if that helps, maybe 10%. "I'm not interested in coming back as an employee," I replied calmly, "but I am available as a consultant." There was a long pause. "What are your terms?" $300 an hour with a 100-hour minimum retainer paid up front. After that, we can negotiate a longer-term arrangement if things work out. He sputtered in protest. That was nearly triple my previous salary on an hourly basis, plus the $30,000 upfront retainer. But by Friday afternoon, with critical systems still failing and clients threatening to pull their business, the company transferred the full amount to my account with a hastily drawn contract. I could have gone in and quickly patched the most critical issues. A few function calls here, a configuration fix there. I knew exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. That would have been the vindictive approach. Do the minimum, take the money, and watch them flail when the next problem inevitably arose. Instead, I chose a more strategic path. I arrived on Monday morning professionally dressed and with a comprehensive plan. Before I implement any fixes, I told the assembled management team, we need to address the root cause of these issues. That starts with proper documentation and knowledge transfer. For the next 6 weeks, I methodically documented everything about the system I'd built. I created training materials and conducted workshops for the junior developers. I established coding standards and review processes, all at $300 an hour, all while maintaining a strictly professional demeanor, even when Marcus tried to pressure me to just fix things quickly. And that's when everything unraveled. During this process, I discovered something interesting. Marcus had been manipulating the project timelines and budgets. He'd been reporting artificial metrics to the board while quietly cutting corners on critical infrastructure. Worse, I found evidence that he'd been padding invoices to vendors and pocketing the difference. Small enough amounts to fly under the radar, but they added up to tens of thousands of dollars. I didn't make accusations. I simply included all financial discrepancies in my thorough documentation, flagging them as areas requiring reconciliation and copying the CFO. Then I waited. 2 days later, internal audit launched an investigation. 1 week after that, Marcus was escorted out of the building by the same security guard who had walked me out. The difference was that police officers were waiting in the lobby for him. Richard, the CEO, called me into his office the following day. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking genuinely remorseful. "We should have listened to your warnings about documentation, and we should have investigated the circumstances of your termination immediately." "Yes, you should have," I agreed without rancor. "We'd like to offer you a new role," he continued, Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to me, with full autonomy over technical decisions and staffing. I considered it briefly before shaking my head. "I appreciate the offer, but I've discovered I prefer consulting. However, I'm open to a long-term contract with clearly defined parameters." The resulting agreement was everything I could have wanted. Triple my former salary on an annualized basis, completely remote work, and veto power over any unreasonable deadlines. I now work about 25 hours a week on my own schedule, spending the rest of my time on personal projects and with my family. As for Marcus, I heard he's been unable to find another position in the industry after being charged with embezzlement and fraud. Apparently, fired for stealing from a startup doesn't look good on a resume. Last I heard, he was trying to rebrand himself as a business efficiency consultant, whatever that means. The company has thrived since his departure. With proper documentation and training, the development team no longer depends on any single person's knowledge. Ironically, by firing me, Marcus forced the organization to finally address the technical debt I'd been warning about for years. Sometimes I think about sending him a thank you note, but my hourly rate for writing those is $600, and somehow I don't think he can afford it anymore. Ever wonder what really happens in those weekly neighborhood gatherings? I never suspected someone's book club could be hiding something so sinister. I never suspected anything was wrong in my marriage until I found those papers. Sarah and I had been together for 12 years, with twin 8-year-old boys and what I thought was a happy life together. She worked as a marketing director while I ran my own moderately successful construction company. We had a nice house in the suburbs, took decent vacations, and generally lived the kind of comfortable upper-middle-class life I'd always worked toward. Sure, there were occasional arguments and the romance had cooled somewhat over the years, but I chalked that up to the normal evolution of a long-term relationship. When Sarah started attending a weekly book club on Thursday evenings about 6 months ago, I was actually happy for her. She'd been complaining about not having enough time for herself or adult conversation that didn't revolve around work or the kids. The book club seemed to energize her. She'd come home in a good mood, sometimes having had a glass or two of wine, talking about the interesting discussions they'd had. "What book are you guys reading this month?" I asked one evening as she was getting ready to leave. "Oh, it's a Margaret Atwood novel," she replied vaguely, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "You wouldn't be interested. It explores themes of female empowerment and societal constraints on women." I nodded, not pressing for details. Sarah had majored in women's studies in college before switching to marketing, and I knew she enjoyed feminist literature. I was just glad she'd found something that made her happy. The discovery happened entirely by accident. Sarah had asked me to grab her laptop charger from her work bag while she was in the shower. As I rummaged through her designer tote, a manila folder slipped out, spilling several documents across the floor. I gathered them up, naturally glancing at the contents as I did so. The heading on the first page froze me in place: Asset Division Strategy. Below it was a detailed accounting of our joint finances, retirement accounts, and property holdings, including my company's valuation. Red notations highlighted accounts that were accessible versus those that would require legal action to access. My company was circled with a note: primary target, business assets undervalued in tax returns. Leverage. My hands shaking, I quickly photographed every page with my phone before returning everything exactly as I'd found it. I brought Sarah her charger when she got out of the shower, forcing myself to act normal while my mind raced. "Found it buried under a bunch of papers," I said casually. "Busy time at work?" "Always," she replied with a smile that now seemed sinister. "Thanks, babe." After she left for her book club, I poured myself a stiff drink and examined the photos I'd taken. They included notes on divorce attorneys, strategies for maximizing settlements, and a bizarre timeline labeled Coordination Schedule for D-Day. Most disturbing was a document titled Financial Extraction Plan, the detailed methods for hiding assets before filing for divorce, including transferring funds to offshore accounts and fabricating business expenses. This wasn't just divorce planning. This was a sophisticated scheme to systematically strip me of everything I'd worked for. I spent a sleepless night wrestling with what to do. Confronting Sarah directly seemed like the worst option. it would only alert her that I'd discovered her plans, causing her to accelerate or modify her strategy. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. The next morning, I called an old friend from college who now worked as a private investigator. Mike listened to my story without judgment and agreed to help immediately. "Don't change your behavior at all," he advised. "Act completely normal while I look into this. If she's planning what you think she is, tipping her off could be financially devastating for you." For the next 3 weeks, I lived a bizarre double life, playing the role of oblivious husband while secretly working with Mike to uncover the full extent of Sarah's plot. What he discovered was more calculated than I could have imagined. The book club consisted of 5 women, including Sarah, all married to relatively successful men. They met not at someone's home as Sarah had claimed, but at a private room in an upscale restaurant, joined by a female attorney named Diane Levinson, who specialized in high-asset divorces. Through surveillance photos and some audio recordings made in the public areas of the restaurant, Mike confirmed they weren't discussing literature. They were strategizing a coordinated plan to divorce their husbands simultaneously while extracting maximum financial benefit. "They've been moving money for months," Mike explained, showing me financial records he'd legally obtained. "Small amounts to avoid triggering alerts, but it adds up. Your wife has diverted nearly $87,000 from your joint accounts to a separate account under her maiden name." I felt physically ill. Why the coordination? Why not just divorce me if she's unhappy? From what we've gathered, their attorney advised that simultaneous filings would overwhelm the court and their husbands, making it harder for any of you to mount an effective defense. They also believe that if all 5 cases establish certain precedents about business valuations, it strengthens each subsequent case. And that's when everything unraveled even further. Mike's investigation revealed that Sarah had been systematically documenting imaginary instances of emotional abuse, creating a false narrative to strengthen her position for custody of our children. There were journal entries describing events that never happened, emails to friends alluding to my controlling behavior, and even a consultation with a therapist where she'd misrepresented our relationship. "She's building a case to get full custody and maximum child support," Mike explained gently. "And based on what I'm seeing, she's been planning this for at least a year." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. Sarah was willing to deny me get access to our children as a negotiating tactic. I thought about the boys, how confused and hurt they would be, and something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about protecting our sons from being pawns in their mother's scheme. I hired the best family law attorney I could find, a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, who specialized in defending men in high-conflict divorces. After reviewing all the evidence, she laid out a counterplan. "We need more," she said frankly. "Text messages, emails between the group members, concrete proof of their coordination and intent to commit fraud. Without that, it's still possible for her to claim she was just exploring options or getting advice." For the next month, I became a dedicated detective in my own home. I recovered deleted emails from our family computer backup system. I documented every unexplained absence and financial discrepancy. I even installed completely legal parental monitoring software on our home computer that captured Sarah's communications. The evidence pile grew, painting an increasingly damning picture. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Diane Levinson's legal assistant contacted me out of the blue after seeing my name on some documents. "What they're planning isn't right," she said nervously when we met at a coffee shop. I became a legal assistant to help people through difficult times, not to help coordinate what they're calling a financial annihilation strategy. "I'm looking for another job, but in the meantime, I thought you should know what's coming." She provided copies of meeting notes and the complete D-Day strategy, set for exactly 1 month later. All 5 wives would file simultaneously on a Friday afternoon, emptying joint accounts that morning and serving their husbands with papers while they were at work. The coordinated media coverage was already arranged. A sympathetic journalist had agreed to write a feature on women breaking free from financial control, using their divorces as case studies. Armed with overwhelming evidence, Rebecca advised that we strike first. If we wait for their D-Day, you'll be starting from a defensive position. We need to control the narrative from the beginning. 2 days later, on a Wednesday when Sarah was at work, I filed for divorce, submitting all our evidence to the court. By the time Sarah was served with papers that afternoon, the judge had already issued emergency orders freezing all our accounts and awarding me temporary primary custody of our sons. Sarah's face when she came home to find me sitting calmly at the kitchen table with my attorney instead of cooking dinner as usual is something I'll never forget. The shock, followed by outrage, followed by the dawning realization that her carefully constructed plan had collapsed. "You had no right to look through my private papers," she sputtered, still trying to control the situation. "And you had no right to conspire to commit financial fraud and deny me access to my children," I replied evenly. "Everything has been submitted to the court, Sarah. Everything, including the book club meetings that never discussed a single novel." The fallout was swift and comprehensive. The judge in our case was furious about the coordinated attempt to abuse the legal system. I reached out to the other 4 husbands with Rebecca's help, providing them copies of all non-privileged evidence that mentioned their names. Within days, all 5 book club members were facing counterfilings with substantial evidence of conspiracy and fraud. The divorce itself was finalized 6 months later. Instead of the financial windfall Sarah had planned, she received only what was legally and fairly hers: no alimony. A true 50-50 split of legitimate marital assets and joint custody of our sons, with a stipulation that she undergo therapy for her deception before having unsupervised overnight visits. Diane Levinson, the attorney who had orchestrated the scheme, now faces disbarment proceedings for ethics violations. Sarah's book club friends scattered like roaches when the light came on, each blaming the others for the idea. Some of their marriages survived after extensive counseling. Others ended in straightforward, fair divorces, nothing like the financial massacres they'd planned. As for me, I'm rebuilding my life one day at a time. The boys and I have a good routine now, and they're adjusting well despite the circumstances. My business continues to thrive, and I've even started dating again, though with considerably more caution than before. The experience taught me that sometimes the greatest threat isn't an obvious enemy, but the person sitting across from you at the dinner table, smiling while they plan your destruction. Speaking of deception, I couldn't believe what unfolded when someone's co-worker tried to discredit their hard-earned promotion. I spent 5 years working my way up at Meridian Solutions, putting in 60-hour weeks, taking on projects nobody else wanted, and making sure every deliverable was flawless. When the senior management position in my department opened up, I knew I was ready. I'd been unofficially doing half the job already, mentoring junior staff and developing our department's strategic initiatives. The promotion process was rigorous: 3 rounds of interviews, a detailed presentation of my vision for the department, skills assessments, and a final panel interview with the executive team. When my manager called me into her office and told me I'd gotten the position, I nearly cried from relief and pride. All those late nights and sacrifice weekends had finally paid off. My excitement lasted exactly 3 days. On my first morning in the new role, I noticed strange glances and hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. My team seemed hesitant during our kickoff meeting, with several people avoiding eye contact. One of my direct reports, Jessica, had always been straightforward with me, so I asked her to stay behind after the meeting. "Is everything okay? The team seems off today," I said once we were alone. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "You haven't heard the rumors." "What rumors?" She sighed. Tyler's been telling everyone that you only got the promotion because you're related to Martin Reynolds. Martin was our VP of operations, a man I'd spoken to perhaps 5 times in my entire tenure at the company, mostly during large meetings or company events. Related to Martin? That's absurd. I've barely even had a one-on-one conversation with him. Jessica nodded. That's what I figured, but Tyler's been very convincing. He's telling everyone you're Martin's niece and that the whole interview process was just for show. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Tyler had been with the company for about 3 years and had also applied for the senior management position. He was competent but not exceptional, the kind of employee who did just enough to get by while spending most of his energy on office politics and building his personal brand. We'd always been cordial, but I'd never considered him a friend. That's completely false, I said firmly. Martin and I aren't related at all. We don't even share a last name. Where would Tyler even get that idea? Jessica shrugged. He claims he overheard Martin talking about his niece getting the position during a phone call. And apparently you both mentioned growing up in Pittsburgh during company events, so because we're both from the same major city, we must be related? I laughed incredulously. Pittsburgh has over 300,000 people. But inside, I wasn't laughing. This baseless rumor threatened to undermine everything I'd worked for. If my team believed I hadn't earned my position, they'd never respect my leadership. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to address the situation by working even harder, arriving earlier, leaving later, and making sure my contributions were visible. I didn't want to dignify the rumors by directly acknowledging them, hoping my work would speak for itself. But Tyler continued his whisper campaign, and I could see it was working. Team members were bypassing me to take questions directly to my boss. Meetings became tense and unproductive, and a couple of people even requested transfers to other departments. Then came the breaking point. During a strategy meeting, I presented a new initiative I'd developed that would streamline our project management process. It was solid work backed by data and careful analysis. Before I'd even finished explaining the concept, Tyler interrupted. This looks suspiciously similar to something Martin presented at the leadership retreat last month, he said with feigned concern. Did your uncle share his notes with you? The room went silent. Several colleagues looked uncomfortable, but no one jumped in to defend me. In that moment, I realized that letting this play out naturally wasn't going to work. I needed to address the situation head on. Tyler, Martin Reynolds is not my uncle, or any relation whatsoever, I said calmly. We're both from Pittsburgh, which is hardly a small town, but that's the extent of our connection. I earned this position through hard work and proven results, just like I earned my degree from Carnegie Mellon through years of study and student loans I'm still paying off. Tyler smirked. Right, some of us had to earn our credentials the hard way, without family connections. The irony of his statement would become apparent very soon. As senior manager, one of my new responsibilities was overseeing our department's annual compliance audit. This included verifying that all team members' credentials matched our HR records. It was tedious work that involved confirming degrees, certifications, and previous employment for everyone in the department. I was halfway through the process when I reached Tyler's file. According to his resume and HR records, he held a master's degree in business analytics from Georgetown University, a credential that had been a minimum requirement for his current role as a senior data analyst. Following standard procedure, I sent a verification request to Georgetown's registrar office. 3 days later, I received their response. They had no record of anyone with Tyler's name ever attending their institution, let alone graduating with a master's degree. I double-checked the details to make sure there hadn't been a clerical error. Perhaps they had looked up the wrong name or year. But after a follow-up call with the university's verification department, the result was the same. According to Georgetown, Tyler had never been enrolled in any program there. This was a serious issue. Our company handles sensitive client data, and employees' credentials were part of our compliance guarantees. A falsified degree wasn't just an HR problem, it potentially put us in breach of client contracts. I could have taken the information directly to HR, but after weeks of Tyler undermining me with false accusations, I decided on a different approach, one that would address both issues simultaneously. I scheduled a department-wide professional development session where each team member would share their career journey, focusing on how their education and experience had prepared them for their current role. I framed it as a team-building exercise to help us understand each other's strengths and backgrounds better in light of our department's recent restructuring. When the day arrived, each team member took turns sharing their story. When it was Tyler's turn, he spent nearly 15 minutes detailing his rigorous experience at Georgetown, describing specific professors, classes, and projects in elaborate detail. He even talked about how challenging it had been to complete the program while working full-time, and how proud he'd been at his graduation ceremony. The business analytics program at Georgetown really emphasizes practical applications, he explained confidently. My capstone project on predictive modeling for retail inventory management is actually what helped me land my position here. After everyone had presented, I thanked the team for their openness and vulnerability. I think this exercise shows how much talent and genuine accomplishment we have in this department, I said. That's why I've always believed in transparency and honesty as core values for our team. I then pulled up a slide with our company's code of ethics highlighted, specifically the section on truthfulness in credentials and qualifications. As part of my new responsibilities, I've been conducting our annual credentials verification, I continued. I want to share something concerning that's come to light. I displayed the official response from Georgetown University, stating they had no record of Tyler's attendance or degree. The room went completely silent. Tyler, would you care to explain this discrepancy? I asked calmly. His face went from shocked to angry to panicked in the span of seconds. There must be some mistake in their records, he stammered. I'll get my transcripts from home. That won't be necessary, I interrupted. I've already verified this information through multiple channels, including speaking directly with Georgetown's registrar office. They have no record of your enrollment or graduation in any year. I then turned to address the entire team. I considered handling this privately, but given the rumors that have been circulating about how I obtained my position, I felt it was important to address this transparently. Unlike speculation about family connections, falsifying credentials is an objective violation of company policy and potentially a legal issue for our client contracts. I'd already briefed HR about the situation before the meeting, so they were prepared when I escorted Tyler to their office immediately afterward. He was terminated that same afternoon, his access revoked, and his personal items shipped to his home address. The impact on the department was immediate and significant. Several team members approached me privately to apologize for believing Tyler's rumors. It turned out he had been spreading similar stories about other colleagues for years, always positioning himself as the only truly qualified person on the team, while undermining anyone he saw as competition. In the weeks that followed, I worked with HR to implement a more transparent promotion process, with clear criteria shared with all candidates before and after decisions. I also initiated regular one-on-one meetings with each team member to build genuine relationships based on mutual respect and honesty. 6 months later, our department's productivity and morale metrics were the highest they'd been in years. The team that had once been fractured by rumors and distrust had become one of the most collaborative groups in the company. As for Tyler, I heard he had trouble finding another position at a similar level without references from our company or a verifiable degree. Last I heard, he was working in a much more junior role at a smaller firm, hopefully having learned that actual accomplishments matter more than the stories you make up about yourself. Trust among friends should be sacred, but sometimes the people closest to you have been sabotaging your future for years without you suspecting a thing. I graduated college with honors, a double major in marketing and business analytics, plus relevant internships at respected companies, I was the dream candidate on paper. Yet somehow, 3 years after graduation, I was still stuck in a part-time retail job, living with my best friend Alicia in a cramped apartment we'd shared since sophomore year. It wasn't for lack of trying. I'd sent out hundreds of applications, networked at industry events, and landed plenty of interviews, over 20 promising ones. But something bizarre happened every single time I got close to receiving an offer. Without fail, during the crucial final interview, my phone would explode with calls from Alicia about some emergency. The first time it happened, I was interviewing for a marketing coordinator position at a tech startup. The interview was going incredibly well. I'd nailed the questions, connected with the hiring manager, and we were discussing start dates as if my hiring was a foregone conclusion. Then my phone started vibrating non-stop in my purse. I tried to ignore it, but after the 5th consecutive call, I apologetically checked the screen. "I am so sorry," I told the interviewer. "My roommate is calling repeatedly. I'm worried something serious might have happened." The hiring manager, understanding but visibly annoyed, suggested I take the call. Stepping outside, I found Alicia in hysterics, claiming her boyfriend had broken up with her and she needed me immediately. By the time I returned to the interview, the energy had shifted. I wasn't offered the position. I didn't connect this to a pattern until it happened again, and again, and again. Sometimes Alicia was stranded with a flat tire. Other times she'd had a fight with a coworker and was threatening to quit. Once she even claimed she'd found a suspicious lump and was terrified it might be cancer. Every emergency turned out to be either greatly exaggerated or entirely resolved by the time I got home. "What incredible timing you have," I remarked sarcastically after the 5th incident. "Your crises always seem to happen during my final interviews." "Just bad luck, I guess," she shrugged, already calm and watching Netflix as if nothing had happened. "Maybe it's a sign those jobs weren't right for you." I wanted to believe her. Alicia had been my best friend since freshman orientation. We'd stayed up all night studying together, held each other through breakups, and she'd even spent holidays with my family when she couldn't afford to fly home. The thought that she might be deliberately sabotaging me seemed paranoid and ungrateful. So I kept interviewing, and the pattern continued. I started putting my phone on silent during interviews, but that created a new problem. The worry that I was missing a legitimate emergency made me distracted and anxious during crucial moments. When I didn't answer, Alicia would leave panic-inducing voicemails. "Please call me back immediately. It's about your mum." Or, "There's something wrong with our apartment, possible fire." After each failed interview, Alicia was sympathetically supportive. "Their loss," she'd say, ordering takeout and suggesting we binge-watch something to cheer me up. "You'll find something better. In the meantime, at least we've got our little apartment and each other, right?" And that's how it went for almost 3 years. I kept interviewing, kept failing at the final hurdle, and kept wondering what was wrong with me. My confidence plummeted. Maybe I wasn't as qualified as I thought. Maybe I had terrible interview skills. Maybe the job market was just that competitive. Then came the interview that changed everything. I was meeting with the marketing director at a mid-sized financial services firm. We'd had 2 excellent preliminary interviews, and this was supposed to be the final formality before an offer. About halfway through our conversation, the director's assistant knocked and whispered something in her ear. The director looked at me with concern. "Ms. Barrett, apparently there's been an accident involving you. Someone named Alicia called our front desk saying you needed to leave immediately." I froze. "An accident involving me?" "Yes," she was quite insistent. "Something about a car accident and your mother being taken to the hospital." My mother was on a Caribbean cruise with my father, something Alicia knew perfectly well since she'd helped me pick out their anniversary gift. There was no accident. My mother wasn't in any hospital. "That's, impossible." I said slowly. My mother is currently on a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, and I haven't been in any accident. I came directly here from home. The director studied me carefully. So this person who called is my roommate, I finished as the pieces finally clicked into place. And I think she just inadvertently revealed something I should have figured out long ago. I checked my phone. No missed calls from Alicia, just a text. How's the interview going? Fingers crossed for you. The director, to her credit, was understanding when I explained my suspicions. That's disturbing, she said. For what it's worth, this explains why you seemed nervous during our previous meetings. I finished the interview in a daze and went straight home to confront Alicia. When I told her what happened, she laughed it off. There must be some misunderstanding, she said breezily. Maybe they confused me with someone else who called. Why would I do something like that? I don't know, Alicia. Why would you? You're being paranoid, she insisted. We've been friends for years. Why would I want to sabotage your career? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore the pattern any longer. That night, I formulated a plan to confirm my suspicions, once and for all. The next week, I told Alicia I had a big interview with a prestigious marketing agency. I gave her all the details, the company name, address, the hiring manager's name, and the exact time. There was just one catch. The interview didn't exist. I had made it all up. On the morning of my fake interview, I dressed up as if going to meet a potential employer, but actually went to a coffee shop near our apartment. From there, I called the company I'd named, asking to speak with the fictional hiring manager I'd invented. I'm sorry, the receptionist told me. We don't have anyone by that name working here. That's strange, I replied. I was supposed to have an interview today, and I just received a call from someone named Alicia, saying there was a family emergency and I needed to reschedule. There was a pause. Actually, we did receive a call about 20 minutes ago from someone named Alicia. She said her friend had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to make an interview today. We were confused because we didn't have any interviews scheduled. That's when everything unraveled. I had my proof, but I needed to understand why. I set up one more trap. I told Alicia I had a phone interview the following week, this time with a friend's voicemail acting as my interviewer. During the call, which Alicia could overhear from the next room, I enthusiastically discussed salary expectations and a start date. When I hung up, Alicia casually asked how it went. They made me an offer, I said, watching her reaction carefully. It's an amazing opportunity, but I'd need to relocate to their headquarters in Chicago. The panic that flashed across her face was unmistakable. Chicago? But what about our apartment? We've been roommates for years. I can't afford this place on my own, and I'd never find someone as compatible as you. And there it was, the motive laid bare. Alicia had been sabotaging my career for years because she was afraid of losing her comfortable living arrangement. My success threatened her stability. When I confronted her with all the evidence, she finally broke down and admitted everything. She had systematically called my potential employers with fake emergencies, each one calculated to either pull me out of interviews or make me appear unprofessional. For 3 years, she had deliberately kept me underemployed and dependent on our shared housing arrangement. I just didn't want things to change, she sobbed. You're my best friend. If you got some fancy job, you'd move on and forget about me. So instead, you decided to ruin my career before it could even start? I was beyond furious. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? The opportunities I've lost? The confidence you've destroyed? I've spent 3 years thinking there was something wrong with me. I recorded our conversation as she confessed to everything. The next day, I shared it with our mutual friends, many of whom had heard Alicia's version of events for years, how I was struggling to find myself and just couldn't seem to nail interviews. The fallout was immediate and complete. Our entire friend group cut ties with her, disgusted by the calculated betrayal. I moved out that weekend, staying temporarily with a college friend while I restarted my job search, this time without Alicia's knowledge. The difference was astonishing. Within 2 months, I had 3 excellent job offers. I accepted a position as a marketing strategist at a growing tech company with a salary that was triple what Alicia made at her dead-end retail job. Last I heard, Alicia couldn't find another roommate willing to live with her after word got around about what she'd done. She had to move back in with her parents in another state. Sometimes I still can't believe someone I trusted so completely could betray me for so long, all to maintain the status quo of a mediocre living arrangement. The silver lining? I learned a valuable lesson about recognizing patterns and trusting my instincts. And my new apartment, which I can easily afford on my own, has a strict no roommate policy. The audacity of entitled neighbors knows no bounds, but one person discovered the perfect way to serve justice when their garden became a battleground. Gardening has been my passion for as long as I can remember. When I bought my house in Oak Ridge Estates 5 years ago, the first thing I did was transform the neglected backyard into a vibrant vegetable garden. I spent countless hours researching optimal soil compositions, companion planting techniques, and organic pest control methods. My garden quickly became my sanctuary, a place where I could disconnect from my high-stress job as a software engineer and reconnect with something tangible and life-giving. Our neighborhood association took community pride seriously, hosting various competitions throughout the year. The annual Best Garden Award was their most prestigious event, with the winner receiving a beautiful handcrafted plaque and a feature in the community newsletter. I won the competition my first year, much to my surprise. By the third year of consecutive wins, I developed a reputation as the neighborhood's gardening guru. People would stop by for advice or to admire my perfectly arranged rows of heirloom tomatoes, rainbow Swiss chard, and prize-winning pumpkins. Not everyone was thrilled with my success, of course. My next-door neighbor, Ron Peterson, had been the reigning garden champion for 5 years before I moved in. Ron was the epitome of suburban respectability, president of the local Rotary Club, deacon at his church, and ethics director on our neighborhood association board. His perfectly pressed khakis and country club polo shirts matched his meticulously maintained front yard. His wife hosted the most elegant dinner parties, and their 3 children were honor roll students who volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. The Petersons were the family everyone aspired to be. Our relationship had always been cordial but cool. Ron would nod from across the fence, but rarely engaged in conversation beyond weather observations. When I won the garden competition for the 3rd year running, with Ron placing second yet again, I noticed his congratulatory handshake was a bit firmer than necessary, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Maybe next year, Ron," I said, trying to be friendly. "We'll see about that," he replied, his tone making it sound more like a threat than friendly competition. I didn't think much of it until a few weeks later, when I noticed something strange happening in my garden. Despite my careful attention, several of my prized vegetable plants began showing signs of distress. First, it was just my award-winning beefsteak tomatoes, their leaves yellowing and curling at the edges. Then my zucchini plants started wilting, followed by my bell peppers. Within 2 weeks, nearly half my garden was showing symptoms that didn't match any pest infestation or disease I could identify. I tried everything, adjusting the soil pH, applying organic fungicides, checking for root knot nematodes, but nothing helped. In fact, the plants seemed to deteriorate more rapidly after each intervention. What was particularly puzzling was the pattern of decline. Only the plants visible from the street or Ron's property were affected. Those hidden behind my garden shed remained perfectly healthy. After a month of increasingly desperate troubleshooting, I began to suspect sabotage. The thought seemed paranoid at first, but the selective pattern of damage was too specific to be coincidental. Could Ron be so bitter about losing a neighborhood competition that he'd actually destroy my garden. Rather than making accusations without proof, I decided to set up a trap. I purchased 3 inconspicuous outdoor security cameras and positioned them to cover different angles of my garden. I disguised them as ordinary garden ornaments, one inside a decorative birdhouse, another hidden among climbing ivy on my fence, and the third tucked into the branches of my apple tree. For nearly a week, the cameras captured nothing unusual. Then, at 5:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I got my answer. The footage clearly showed Ron, dressed in dark clothing and wearing gardening gloves, carefully making his way through my side gate, which I always kept unlocked for my elderly mother's visits. He carried a small spray bottle, which he methodically applied to my vegetable plants before slipping back out, the entire operation taking less than 10 minutes. I was stunned. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, that there was some natural explanation for my garden's decline. But there it was in high definition. My respectable neighbor, the community's moral compass, deliberately poisoning my plants under cover of dawn. Rather than confronting Ron immediately, I decided to gather more evidence. Over the next 3 weeks, the cameras caught him repeating his toxic visits 6 more times. Always before sunrise, always with the same methodical application of what I now suspected was some type of herbicide. While documenting Ron's sabotage, I implemented the second part of my plan. Behind my detached garage, completely hidden from street view and Ron's property, I started a new garden. I transplanted healthy specimens of every variety I had previously won awards for, plus a few new experimental varieties I'd been excited to try. I irrigated the area with a silent drip system and erected a small greenhouse for the more delicate plants. Meanwhile, I allowed my visible garden to continue deteriorating, occasionally making a show of looking distressed as I inspected the dying plants when Ron was outside. I even approached him once, asking if his garden was experiencing any similar issues. "No problems at all," he replied with barely concealed satisfaction. "Must be your technique. Perhaps you're overwatering." I nodded thoughtfully. "Could be. Your garden is looking exceptional this year, by the way." And it was. Ron, believing he had successfully eliminated his competition, had doubled down on his gardening efforts. His vegetables were undeniably impressive, his flower arrangements artful. He began casually mentioning the upcoming competition in conversation with other neighbors, all but declaring his imminent victory. As the competition approached, I quietly took my evidence to the police to file a report for trespassing and property damage. The officer who reviewed my footage was incredulous. "This guy's poisoning your tomatoes because of a garden competition?" he asked, shaking his head. "Some people really need to get their priorities straight." I also sent copies of the evidence to 2 trusted members of the Neighborhood Association Board, explaining that I planned to present it at the next meeting, but wanted to give them advance notice, given Ron's position as ethics director. The association's monthly meeting was scheduled for the evening before the garden competition. Ron was leading the meeting, looking confident in his button-down shirt and carefully pressed slacks. The agenda included final details for the next day's competition, and Ron had even prepared a PowerPoint presentation outlining the judging criteria. Criteria that, I noticed, had been subtly modified to favor his garden's strengths. After Ron concluded his presentation and asked if there were any questions, I raised my hand. "I have a matter to discuss regarding ethics and fair play in our community events," I said, my heart pounding despite my calm exterior. Ron nodded magnanimously, gesturing for me to continue. "The floor is yours." I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up the first video clip. "Before I begin, I want to say that I've already filed a police report regarding what you're about to see, and I've provided copies to board members Thompson and Garcia for verification." The room fell silent as the footage began playing on the large screen. There was Ron, unmistakably identifiable despite his attempt at inconspicuous clothing, methodically poisoning my garden. I played clips from 3 different dates, each with clear timestamps and multiple angles, showing both his face and his actions. These videos document 6 separate occasions when my neighbor, Ron Peterson, trespassed on my property to deliberately sabotage my garden by applying what I believe to be herbicide to my plants. This began shortly after last year's garden competition and continued until just last week. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Ron's face had drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. His wife, sitting in the front row, stared at him with an expression of horrified disbelief. "I've been gardening in this community for 5 years," I continued, "and while I appreciate healthy competition, I don't believe destroying someone else's hard work aligns with the values this neighborhood claims to uphold, especially from someone serving as our ethics director." What happened next unfolded with the swiftness of a summer storm. The board immediately called an emergency executive session, asking Ron to step outside. 20 minutes later, they announced his removal from the board and his disqualification from the garden competition. The police officers who had been waiting outside served him with a citation for criminal trespassing and property damage. Ron's carefully constructed reputation collapsed completely. The same neighbors who had admired his perfect family and sought his advice now avoided eye contact as he and his wife hurried from the building. By the following morning, news of the scandal had spread throughout the community. Several families withdrew their children from play dates with the Peterson kids. His wife's dinner party invitations were suddenly declined. The church board requested he step down from his deacon position temporarily. The garden competition proceeded as scheduled the next day. With Ron disqualified and my visible garden destroyed, the judges were surprised when I invited them behind my garage to see my hidden garden. The expressions on their faces as they took in my thriving vegetables and flowers were worth every minute of extra work the secret garden had required. "This is remarkable," the head judge said, examining my Cherokee purple tomatoes. "Given the circumstances, we had assumed you wouldn't be competing this year." "I believe in being prepared," I replied simply. I won my 4th consecutive Best Garden award that afternoon. The victory was bittersweet. I took no pleasure in the Peterson family's public humiliation, especially for their children. But there was undeniable satisfaction in seeing justice served through Ron's own actions. The Petersons put their house on the market 3 weeks later. Ron had apparently also lost his position at the bank where he worked as a compliance officer, his employer uncomfortable with having an employee facing criminal charges for what amounted to ethical violations. They moved away before the summer ended, their perfect life unraveled by Ron's inability to accept second place in a neighborhood garden competition. As for me, I replanted my front garden once I was certain the soil was free from whatever chemicals Ron had used. I still win the garden competition most years, though I make a point of mentoring newer gardeners and occasionally suggesting improvements to the judging criteria to keep things fair and transparent. Sometimes I think about Ron, wondering if he learned anything from the experience. I hope so, because while gardens can be replanted, reputations, like trust once poisoned, take much longer to grow back. Wedding drama reaches new heights when the people you trust most turn your special moments into nightmares. My cousin Jessica and I grew up more like sisters than cousins. Our mothers were twins who lived just 3 blocks from each other, so we spent almost every day together as children. We shared clothes, secrets, and dreams. When we were 12, we even created a detailed scrapbook of our future weddings, hers with a beach ceremony, mine in a historic church with stained glass windows. So when I got engaged to Mark last year, asking Jessica to be a bridesmaid was automatic, like breathing. "Actually," Jessica said when I asked her, her eyes lighting up, "let me plan your bachelorette weekend. I've got so many ideas already." I hesitated briefly. Jessica had always been the spontaneous one while I was the planner, but she seemed so enthusiastic that I pushed aside my reservations. "That would be amazing," I agreed. Nothing too wild though, just something fun with the girls. Jessica immediately took charge, creating a group chat with my 7 bridesmaids to coordinate details. She proposed a 3-day weekend at a lakeside resort about 2 hours from our hometown, with spa treatments, wine tasting, and a sunset cruise. Everyone loved the concept when she suggested a budget of $500 per person to cover accommodations, activities, and some meals. No one objected. This is going to be absolutely unforgettable, Jessica promised repeatedly in our group messages. The red flags were there in retrospect. Jessica was vague about specific details, deflecting questions about confirmation numbers or itineraries with comments like, "I want it to be a surprise," or "Trust me, I've got this handled." She collected the money through direct transfers to her personal account rather than creating a shared fund, insisting it was easier to manage that way. But I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? This was Jessica, the person who had held my hair back when I got sick at my first high school party, who had helped me move into my first apartment, who knew all my secrets and insecurities. If I couldn't trust her, who could I trust? The weekend of my bachelorette party arrived 6 weeks before the wedding. We all met at my house Friday morning, loading our luggage into 2 SUVs for the drive to Lake Geneva. The mood was festive, everyone wearing matching Bride Tribe shirts Jessica had ordered, a playlist of our favorite songs blasting through the speakers. We arrived at the lake around noon, everyone excited to check into our lakefront cabins and begin the celebration. Jessica directed us to the resort's main lodge, then frowned at her phone. "That's weird," she muttered. "Let me go talk to the front desk. Wait here." 20 minutes later, she returned looking flustered. "There's been some kind of mistake with our reservation," she explained. "They claim they don't have anything under my name." "Did you bring the confirmation email?" my friend Megan asked. Jessica's expression tightened. "They're saying there is no confirmation because no reservation was ever made. It must be their error. I booked this months ago. Let me try calling some other places nearby." For the next 2 hours, we sat in the resort's lobby while Jessica made call after call, each ending with the same result: no availability for a group our size on a peak summer weekend. Eventually, we managed to find 2 overpriced rooms at a motel 20 minutes away from the lake. Nothing like the luxury cabins we'd been promised. "What about the spa appointments?" my sister Amy asked as we unloaded our bags into the dingy rooms. "And the wine tasting?" "There must have been last-minute cancellations," Jessica said, her voice defensive. "These things happen sometimes. We can still have fun." But as the evening progressed, it became clear that nothing had been arranged. No reservations at restaurants, no bookings for activities, nothing. We ended up ordering pizza to our motel rooms and buying wine from a grocery store. That's when things took a turn from disappointing to devastating. While Jessica was in the shower, Megan's phone pinged with an email. "That's weird," she said, staring at a screen. "Jessica just accidentally forwarded me an email thread. It looks like a conversation with herself." We gathered around to look. The email contained a forwarded message thread where Jessica had been using 2 different email accounts to have a conversation with herself, one posing as the resort, the other as herself. The fake resort emails contained statements like, "We're so sorry, but we'll need to cancel your reservation due to overbooking," and "Unfortunately, we cannot refund your deposit at this time." But there was no deposit. There had never been any reservations at all. "Scroll down," Amy whispered, her face pale. At the bottom of the email was a spreadsheet Jessica had created titled "Bachelorette Weekend Finances." It showed the $4,000 she had collected from all of us, with only $200 marked as actual expenses for the matching shirts and some decorations she'd brought. The remaining $3,800 was labeled personal compensation, with subcategories for new laptop, credit card payment, and Cabo Vacation Fund. We sat in stunned silence, staring at the evidence of Jessica's betrayal. She hadn't just failed to plan the weekend, she had deliberately scammed us, her closest friends and family, out of thousands of dollars. When Jessica emerged from the shower, she found us all sitting quietly, Megan's phone on the bed between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her smile faltering. "You tell us," I said, turning Megan's phone toward her. "Seems like you accidentally forwarded some interesting emails." Jessica's face cycled through confusion, shock, and then anger with remarkable speed. Rather than apologizing, she went on the offensive. "So what if I kept some of the money?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea how many hours I spent thinking about this weekend? Planning takes time and effort. I deserved compensation." "Planning what exactly?" Amy countered. "Nothing is booked. You didn't do anything except cash our checks." "Of course you would all gang up on me," Jessica said, focusing her glare on me. Miss Perfect with her perfect fiancé and perfect job and perfect life. Some of us have real problems, you know. Some of us are drowning in debt while watching our cousins prance around with 3-carat engagement rings. I felt like I'd been slapped. Was that really how she saw me? As some privileged princess? I'd worked 2 jobs through college, lived in a tiny studio apartment for years to save money, and Mark and I had saved for 3 years to afford my ring. "You've been jealous of me this whole time?" I asked quietly. "So jealous that you decided to steal from me and my friends?" "It's not stealing if I earned it," Jessica insisted, though her voice wavered. "And it's not my fault if you all assumed every penny would go toward the weekend." In that moment, I had a choice. I could let Jessica's betrayal derail my wedding season, feeding into drama and resentment, or I could handle it with dignity and move forward. I chose the latter. "Jessica, I think you should leave," I said calmly. "You're no longer in my bridal party, and you're no longer welcome at my wedding. Tomorrow I'll be calling my father to discuss the legal implications of what you've done." "You wouldn't dare," she gasped, suddenly looking frightened. "That would destroy me. My credit is already ruined. I can't afford to pay everyone back right now." "You should have thought of that before you stole $4,000 from us," I replied. "We'll expect full repayment, or we'll be pressing charges for fraud." After Jessica stormed out, calling an Uber since she'd ridden with us, my bridesmaids and I sat in that cheap motel room and made a decision. We weren't going to let her ruin this weekend. We pulled together our remaining funds, found a reasonably priced Airbnb for the following night, and improvised our own activities: a homemade mimosa brunch, swimming in the lake, and karaoke at a local dive bar. It wasn't the luxury weekend we paid for, but it became genuinely memorable for entirely different reasons. Upon returning home, I immediately informed my parents and other family members about Jessica's actions. My father, an attorney specializing in commercial litigation, called Jessica the next day. Within a week, she had taken out a high-interest loan and repaid everyone in full, clearly terrified of facing legal consequences. Jessica wasn't invited to my wedding. Instead of drama, the day was filled with love and authentic celebration. The photos are beautiful, but more importantly, everyone present genuinely wanted to be there supporting us. The fallout continued long after the wedding. When my aunt, Jessica's mother, heard what happened, she was mortified. "This isn't the first time," she admitted reluctantly. "She did something similar with her friend's graduation party last year. We've been trying to get her into therapy, but she refuses." Over the next few years, more stories emerged from other family members and friends. Jessica had apparently been running similar schemes for years, always targeting people who trusted her implicitly, and always manufacturing some reason why she deserved to take their money. 5 years later, she's still not welcome at family gatherings, having burned nearly every bridge possible. Sometimes I look back at that childhood scrapbook we made, our innocent dreams of perfect weddings and lifelong friendship. I feel sad for the cousin I lost, but I don't regret setting that boundary. True friends celebrate your happiness. They don't resent it enough to sabotage it. Some family betrayals cut deeper than others, especially when your in laws target what you've worked your entire life to build.